Uh, Today I want to start out by the topic is the incredible shrinking presidency of Barack Obama. Anyone doubt that that's happening? Well, I think we are facing a moment, and I'm going to talk about essentially why I write books and what the point of writing books is and where we're going. In 2008, I wrote a book called The Obama Nation, and it was #1 in the New York Times bestseller list for a month. Now, I was excoriated for this book. The Fox hated it, the left hated it. I was called every name in the you can imagine. Even Obama went on and said the book was lies, 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 which should have affirmed to everybody it was truth, truth, truth. And it was the first time I had researched Obama and followed him since 2004, and what this book said, and what I laid out in the book, was that Obama, first of all, we don't really know who he is. We don't really know where he was born. Yes, we've got a computer-generated birth certificate that Hawaii says is authentic, but no, you can't see the original documents. Why? And what we do know about Obama is that he has been trained by Marxists since he was a child. And as a committed communist, although they want to call themselves progressives, the Democratic Party, when I was a child, is not the Democratic Party of today. This is a Democratic Party that hates America. In a sense, it's progressive only because it doesn't want to admit that it's really socialist or communist. But, the point is, biblically, if we're going to judge what the tree is, what do we do? Look at the fruits. And we look at the fruits of this tree, what we see is what we always see in socialism, and that is a complete destruction of the private economy. Anyone really better off than they were before Barack Obama came into office? But how's the income redistribution and Obamacare working out for everybody? Increased taxes. Take a look at Detroit. Detroit is the same as a dozen of our major cities. They're dying under decades of Democratic rule. And this is a story that I want to point out is a story we need to tell. And it starts with writing. Now, I spent 3 weeks with the Romney campaign flying as embedded press at the end of the presidential campaign. And at the end of it, I wrote a book called What Went Wrong. And what I was trying to explain is that, first of all, the Democrats have devised now the cynical cutting, slicing, and dicing of the electorate, so the Democrats know who their voters are. Their voters are the resurrected FDR coalition in new form. So you've got African Americans, 96% voting for Barack Obama, 13% of the population. And the question that we don't ask, the question that the mainstream media, that we're going to have to find a way, and this is what I want to focus on, how we make the American people aware of this incredible shrinking presidency, is that we don't ever hear the question, what has Barack Obama done for African Americans? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Except to increase the unemployment, to increase the racism in the country, to increase the division. And, by the way, how many people here are Tea Party affiliated? What has the GOP done to press the problem? Nothing. GOP says, John Boehner, McConnell, don't rock the boat. We don't want to appear to be racist. We don't want to make the argument which should be made, and that is, if you want to improve the economic condition of African Americans, you're not going to do it by bringing in an underclass of Hispanics. And who is the sovereign in America? We the people. If the Republican Party doesn't get that the Tea Party is the core of where America needs to be, then we don't need the Republican Party. I'm sorry, we don't. And the message I'm going to give, in contradiction to some of the other speakers, is yes, take it over, or it'll go the way of the Whig Party, which is what it deserves to do. Because you go to, I think the next 2 years are critical. The next 2 years I'm going to write more. But I'm preparing to do what I did in 2004 with John O'Neill and the Swift Boats, writing Unfit for Command, going against John Kerry, with this book that really should have beaten Obama, and we were leading in the polls, even with McCain. And you spell his last name R-I-N-O, McCain. McCain and Romney were the two absolutely worst candidates you could have had. And it was a Republican establishment that produced these candidates. As I pointed out in What Went Wrong, is the same message that Phyllis Schlafly gave in the 1950s, which was a choice, not an echo. Does anyone remember that book? It was a short little book that Phyllis wrote, and she was saying the Deweys, the Rockefeller Republicans, the moderate wing of the Republican Party that really is as big government as the Democrats, really wants to spend as much money, have as big a bureaucracy. And Karl Rove is going to attack the Tea Party. The core establishment of the Republican Party has spent 6 years attacking the Tea Party. Why? Because Karl Rove wants all the power and all the money. And for me saying, look, I need X thousands of dollars to prepare to write another one of these, do you think I'm going to get it from any fat cat, big donor Republican? No way. Because fundamentally, they're just as happy to keep me off Fox 2. Because they don't want the message told that the Tea Party wants and needs to tell, which is why the Star-Spangled Banner ends in a question. Is that flag still flying? And as Franklin Roosevelt as Franklin Roosevelt did everything he could to introduce socialism, to change the fundamental premise, to say the Democratic Party is open to abandoning the Constitution, so that progressives, socialists, really communists, beginning in Hawaii, and I can show you the hearings from Hawaii in the 1950s where the communists testified that they'd made a decision to take over the Democratic Party because it was easier to gain control of America if they denied being communists. Or as Khrushchev said, we'll bury you because your children, saying in the 50s, will be communists. Why? Because with Soviet disinformation, that the army, as John Kerry said, in Vietnam was the army of Genghis Khan, I documented John Kerry was meeting with Madam Bin, who was the chief negotiator of the Viet Cong, while he was in uniform, and he should have been court-martialed, if not jailed, as a traitor. If we, the people, are determined across the country to say that the fundamental principles of limited government and the Constitution need to be abided, the Republican Party is going to have to listen. Because without the Tea Party, the Republican Party, despite how many money the Koch brothers and all the others want to give to Karl Rove, is not going to win elections. The reason Romney lost was because of all largely Christian voters, basically conservative and in agreement with the Tea Party, and flying through areas like, Lima, Ohio, and Findlay, and all these areas where the crowds would come out for Romney, but the people fundamentally said, if we get Romney Care and Obamacare, what's the difference? And if the base of the party is not motivated, if the Tea Party is saying basically we'll just as soon sit in our chairs and watch, then we're going to lose like we lost with McCain. We're going to lose like we lost with Romney, because the next nominee, and look at the lists that are being considered. I mean, Chris Christie, Mr. Huggy Kissy Face with Barack Obama in the last weeks of the campaign that could have destroyed the initiative, any, that Romney may have had. Or are we going to go to another Bush? And in the process, watch carefully how the Republican establishment moves to destroy Ted Cruz, moves to destroy Rand Paul. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz have got to realize that their enemies are not just the Democrats. They're also the Karl Rove establishments, the fat cat contributors who are going to give Karl another $300 million, going to have more messaging money. What are the Democrats doing? The Democrats are going to say, okay, we get 96% of the African Americans, we get 70% of the Hispanics, we take all the feminists, we get 70% of them, we add them to the labor unions, we get 87% of them, they're 15% of the population, we add up 13% African American and maybe now almost the same Hispanic. Then we add the percentage of the women, all these high percentage voters for the Democrats, plus the youth that we think can make it seem to be cool that we get Barack Obama because he's going to be the first black president and he can go on, the DeGeneres show and do a little dance and be a cute talk show host. He's cool. McCain wasn't cool. McCain was old. And the Democrats can do that positioning. They add up all these segments. They don't spend the $300 million giving it to Karl Rove. They give it to computer geniuses who have iPads in the field with workers signed up with OFA who get pushed 50 names of voters to go get and say you get to keep your iPad if you get 50 more. And by the way, we're going to give you 3 weeks to get them all to vote. If they don't vote, you figure out a way to vote for them anyway. And with that kind of technology, that kind of voter segmentation, what the demographers working for the Democrats are saying is the Democrats are on the verge of creating a permanent presidential electoral majority. Why? Because they know that the Republicans will not support the base of their party. But the Democrats will promise everything to everybody. And in the next 2 years, we have a choice. We have a unique choice to do what I've been doing since 2004. I spent 25 years in financial services. When I wrote Unfit for Command, I changed careers. And I've been doing this since. I wrote 2 books on the border, Minutemen, with Jim Gilchrist, and The Late Great USA. And what I was saying is, and you need to understand what's in these books, because the opening of the border is a calculated decision by the extreme left to erase the idea of the United States as a country. Every human being is illegal. We're all equally citizens of the world. We're all members of the United Nations. Barack Obama gets his way, he will certainly do an executive order saying that 5 million illegals will no longer be deported, which is effectively amnesty. If he really gets creative, what they've set the stage to do is to say these are refugees under the UN protection who are given international status and asylum, and Barack Obama will begin sending airplanes to El Salvador So the refugees can go in and sign up with the embassy and get flown to the United States at taxpayer expense as a refugee program. And that's actively under consideration. In the meantime, we have an open border across which come criminals, and the recent murderer of this Border Patrol Vega, in front of his parents, his wife, and his children while he was fishing, by two Mexican criminals one of whom had been deported already 4 times, who came to rob him, and he was armed, and he got into a gunfight with them, wounded one of them, and was killed in front of his whole family by an illegal immigrant who should never have been in the country, with Border Patrol agents who are saying, why should we bother risking our lives when in fact all these people are going to be welcomed here under amnesty? If the Tea Party doesn't want this to happen, if the Tea Party wants Obama impeached, and how many people here want Obama impeached? Is tomorrow too soon? Okay. The Republican GOP will tell you, oh, this will just increase support for Obama. Oh, we don't want to do this because look at the sympathy. The Democrats write the line for the GOP to use. They write the playbook that they hand to the GOP and say, do this. Just as they said, oh, we think Romney's a great candidate because they know they can beat him. And McCain, oh, we really like McCain, which is what was being said before in 2008. McCain's okay. And whichever one the Democrats think that they can beat this time, they're going to be saying months before that candidate is really not so bad. So the Republicans nominate him. Then out comes all the opposition research, and the Democrats systematically destroy the candidate. On the Romney airplane, when the press got an opportunity to ask a question, what do you think they asked? They wanted to know Todd Aiken questions about rape, because they knew those were wedge issues. They could make the Republicans look stupid. They knew it would put Romney in a corner, and Stuart Stevens, who was messaging for Romney, didn't have an answer, didn't have a way to combat that, didn't have a way to push that back at the Democrats and say, look, if we want to talk about abortion and say that it is immoral, we're going to say it. The Republicans are not effectively able to answer today against the LGBT lobby, which is saying to the Republican Party, if you don't accept LGBT rights as civil rights as equivalent to racial discrimination, then your pastors are going to be committing hate crimes for preaching the Bible. And what is the GOP doing? GOP is saying, we ought to be open to LGBT. We don't want to lose the votes. I mean, this is again where the Tea Party has got to stand up and say, just like happened to the Whigs, when fundamentally those who wanted to end slavery, those who wanted to pursue the moral path for the nation, saw no purpose to being in the Whig Party. And how many of you saw the movie Lincoln by Spielberg? Yeah. He hardly ever mentioned a critical fact, namely that Lincoln was a Republican. The whole movie was presented as if the Democratic Party had nominated Abraham Lincoln. All those people you saw in the movie wanting to have slavery were the Democrats. Yet the GOP does not reclaim its true legacy, which is to have fought for freedom, to have fought for emancipation, since Lincoln said, I'm not a Whig anymore. If Lincoln were here today, he'd be a Tea Party member. And Lincoln had the courage of his conviction. If you read Lincoln's speeches, what you read is the Bible rephrased into modern political terms. Lincoln's two major sources of reading. We talked about reading today. Number one, you know what number one was for Lincoln? What he read? The Bible. Number two, he read Shakespeare. He got phrasing out of Shakespeare. And we need to return again, not to be cowed by a GOP that says, don't have the courage of your convictions, but to say, wait a minute, we are the Tea Party. What we need is funders who will organize. I'll go on the internet to raise the money if I have to do the research necessary to produce the next one of these against whomever the Democrats nominate. Because I know the GOP won't. In 2004, when John O'Neill organized the Swift Boat veterans, you know what Karl Rove did? He said, we don't need them. We don't want them. Do you think either John or I ever once was invited to the White House to meet George W. Bush? No, because the Republican Party was embarrassed by the Swift Boat movement. And the Democrats have used swift boating as a term of lying about a candidate. Again, trying to maintain the narrative. The money that needs to be spent like the Democrats spend it. If we've got issues, we need to have organized think tanks, like the American Center for Progress, which the Democrats organize that and many. And then they go into action groups when they form issues. So they form groups around pro-choice or groups around education. Their OFA is an organization that is active. The money is poured into grassroots. There's no more powerful message than the Tea Party has if we, in fact, can get spending in the Republican side among conservatives funded by people who have the hundreds of millions or the billions to create the think tanks, to be able to push the issues down to the level of the grassroots. Because the message of the Tea Party, the message of the GOP fundamentally, and I write at WND.com. I hope many of you read us there. Joseph Farah, I think, has done an outstanding job of maintaining a biblical perspective on the news and advancing news that is honest, news that is really seriously reported, news that tells the truth. And I also do editorials for teaparty.org. If any of you have watched that and looked at it, I suggest you watch organizations like this. The message of the conservative message, which is a message that we need to be able to focus and deliver to the African American community, to the Hispanic community, which is the Democrats are going to invite you here, they're going to promise you everything. They're going to deliver nothing to you but slavery. And so, you've got an Obama phone and food stamps and welfare, and for that little tiny bit, you've sold your soul. Whereas if we explain and say, okay, here's what Detroit looks like, here's what Cleveland looks like, in ways where the American people can see it. And by the way, the initiative to do this comes from you. Because I'm going to go back to the theme that I began with, and that is if we say to the GOP no more of our money, no more of our votes, no more of our support, no more Boehner, no more Mitch McConnell, no more Karl Rove, you can keep them all. No more UN, no more IRS. These are the issues. If we are able to articulate them and push them into the dialogue and say to the Hispanics, look, we're not racist. What we want is legal immigration, where we know the people coming into the country and those who get here legally. And how do you think someone who has immigrated here after 10 years, spending tens of thousands of dollars, waiting in line feels when a criminal walks across the border and is released? And that's, again, what we have to point out. The African American community, we've got to point out what's been done for you other than to take your votes. You know, the angry feminists that want their contraceptives paid for. You know, look, they're not that expensive. And are you going to sell yourself into dependency, which is what socialism always is? Give me your money. I'll manage it for you. Income redistribution. No, we don't need any income redistribution. It wasn't in the Constitution. The IRS wasn't in the Constitution. And when a lawyer as responsible as Cleta Mitchell in Washington, who I know personally has worked for decades for conservative causes, tells Representative Isa's committee that the IRS is so rotten to the core, it needs to be shut down and income tax repealed. Is because Cleta Mitchell knows that Lois Lerner intentionally destroyed the hard disks, that there are dozens of them that have destroyed emails. They know they're going to get away with it because Eric Holder won't do a thing. Well, if the Justice Department won't enforce our laws, then let's prosecute Eric Holder. You know, we have a department of, you know, we have the whole Department of Homeland Security. Homeland Security, you know, is fine, except that with porous borders, Homeland Security is inviting, you know, illegals, criminals, everyone to come across the border, diseases. And we need to press these issues because, you know, what Obama said, and I reported here, was he'd spent entire education as a Muslim. His Muslim faith, you remember that? Well, what we have now in the Middle East is chaos. We have the potential of every Christian in the Middle East being killed. And if John Kerry won't support Israel, then we need to impeach John Kerry. So I'm going to conclude in this. This book I wrote is the one that's coming, America for Sale. And I wrote it a couple of years ago. It's what happens when the currency collapses. And the currency is going to collapse. And again, the only thing that can prevent it is if we insist that the government quit spending money like making drunken sailors would be embarrassed the way our government is behaving. So my message to you today is simple. It's what I'm going to do is whatever I can to continue exposing as an author, you know, trying to find the money to do the responsible research, scrimping and figuring out ways to get it done, so that we can publish a book against the Democratic candidate, so we can expose these various issues. So why I write with WND. Joseph Farah has given me a wonderful forum, editorial direction with the ability to really investigate these things and the courage to report them. And I commend the Washington Times for advancing in this direction as well as others. We need to work together and support each other. But my message to all of you is that question that the national anthem ends with, whether the flag is still flying, whether, as Ben Franklin said, you know, a republic if you can keep it. That everyone here, and we think, oh, well, we're getting older. We're getting older. We have the time. We're not dead yet. We're going to vote. We're going to influence policy, and no GOP can succeed if we launch the revolution to say, no, we're not going to be afraid of our convictions. We're not going to be afraid that if we impeach Obama, we might increase his support. If we impeach him, we might get rid of him. And that the sovereign of this country, what our founding fathers depended on, was that we are the sovereign. And it's time to tell the federal government that if the federal government thinks it's the boss, it's time to shut it down department by department. Thank you. It's been a great honor to be with you. Look forward to talking with you in some book signing. Thank you all very much.
Dr. Jerome Corsi.